On August 12, 1999, the scorching Arizona sun beat down on Paradise Valley, an affluent suburb of Phoenix known for its sprawling desert estates and mountain views. For real estate agent Meredith Holloway, it was supposed to be just another property showing, a luxury home nestled against the McDowell Mountains that had recently hit the market. As she approached the neighboring property to get a better view of the landscape for her clients, Holloway noticed something unusual. The Fletcher Ramirez residence, typically immaculate with its modern southwestern architecture, had newspapers piled at the front door and blinds drawn shut in the middle of the day. Unusual for a home whose owners were known for entertaining and their appreciation of the desert panorama. When her knocks went unanswered and a faint, peculiar odor drifted through the air, Holloway's instincts told her something was wrong. She peered through a side window and saw what appeared to be a figure lying motionless on the living room floor. Within minutes, her 911 call brought Phoenix Police Department patrol officers to the scene. First responders forced entry through the back door and discovered the bodies of Bryce Fletcher and Elena Ramirez in their living room, both deceased for what appeared to be several days. The home showed no obvious signs of forced entry or struggle. The alarm system had been properly disarmed, and nothing seemed immediately out of place in the meticulously decorated home. Detective Mason Reed arrived at the scene within the hour. A 15-year veteran of the Phoenix Police Department's Homicide Division, Reed had built his reputation on methodical investigation and an uncanny ability to see patterns where others saw coincidence. As he stepped through the threshold, he noted the precise positioning of the bodies. Fletcher was found near the large picture window overlooking the pool, while Ramirez was discovered a few feet away, near the entrance to their home office. The positioning doesn't suggest a typical home invasion, Reed noted in his initial report. There's intentionality here. The victims weren't surprised by an intruder, they knew their killer. The forensics team discovered minute traces of a powdery substance on Fletcher's hands and clothing. Both victims showed signs of poisoning rather than physical trauma. Their lips bore a subtle bluish tint and there were no defensive wounds. The medical examiner on site, Dr. Valerie Chen, estimated they had been dead for approximately 72 hours, placing their time of death on the evening of August 9th. Whatever killed them acted quickly, Dr. Chen remarked. They likely had minimal time to realize what was happening. As crime scene investigators photographed and catalogued the scene, Reed began his preliminary examination of the home. The kitchen revealed 2 wine glasses on the counter, both containing residue of a Cabernet Sauvignon. In the trash, a delivery food container from Rosario's, an upscale Italian restaurant in Scottsdale, suggested their final meal had been delivered rather than prepared at home. The house itself told the story of a successful couple with expensive tastes. Original artwork adorned the walls, high-end furniture filled each room, and the expansive back patio featured an infinity pool overlooking the desert landscape. Yet, amid this luxury, Reed observed something curious. Fletcher's home office had been subtly disturbed. Books on shelves appeared slightly out of alignment, and a wall safe behind a painting of the Sonoran Desert stood open and empty. The killer knew exactly what they were looking for, Reed commented to his partner, Detective Sarah Blackwell. This wasn't random, it was targeted. Background checks on the victims painted a picture of accomplished professionals in their mid-30s who had relocated to Phoenix less than a year ago. Bryce Fletcher, 37, had accepted a prestigious position at Novatech Pharmaceuticals, a research facility specializing in experimental compounds. His wife, Elena Ramirez, 34, had secured a teaching position in the anthropology department at Arizona State University, where her work focused on indigenous cultures of the Southwest. What puzzled investigators was the apparent contradiction in the evidence. The house showed signs of a careful, deliberate intrusion by someone familiar with the property and its security systems, yet the open safe and disturbed office suggested a robbery. The combination of these elements, along with the unusual method of killing, led Reed to suspect a crime far more complex than a simple break-in gone wrong. By evening, as the golden Arizona sunset cast long shadows across the crime scene, investigators had collected dozens of evidence samples, including the wine glasses, food containers, and the mysterious powder residue. Neighbors were being interviewed, and security camera footage from nearby homes was being collected. Reed stood in the driveway, watching as the bodies were finally removed from the home. Fletcher and Ramirez weren't random victims, he told Blackwell. Someone wanted them dead and wanted something they had. Our job is to figure out what was valuable enough to kill for. What investigators didn't know yet was that the Fletcher-Ramirez case would soon expand far beyond a double homicide. The powder on Fletcher's hands would prove to be just the first thread in a complex web of scientific research, ancient artifacts, and international smuggling that would challenge even Reed's methodical approach to investigation. As night fell over Paradise Valley, Reed made a final walkthrough of the property. In the master bedroom, a framed photo caught his attention, Fletcher and Ramirez standing together in front of what appeared to be an archaeological dig site. Both were smiling, but it was the third person in the photo, partially visible at the edge of the frame, that caused Reed to pause. The man's face was familiar, though Reed couldn't immediately place it. He bagged the photo as evidence, unaware that this single image would eventually become a crucial piece in solving the case. Before leaving, Reed instructed the officer stationed at the scene to pay special attention to the Home Office. "Whatever happened here started with whatever was in that safe," he said, "and I have a feeling that what was taken from this house is far more valuable than money or jewelry." Little did he know how right he was, or how the investigation would soon reveal that Bryce Fletcher and Elena Ramirez had stumbled upon something that powerful people would kill to possess, a discovery that would eventually expose a conspiracy reaching back decades into Arizona's history and forward into its future. As dawn broke over Phoenix the next morning, Detective Mason Reed was already reviewing the preliminary reports from the medical examiner. The toxicology screenings would take days, but Dr. Chen's initial findings confirmed his suspicions. Both victims had died from a sophisticated neurotoxin, one rarely seen outside specialized research facilities. "It's not something you'd find on the street," Dr. Chen explained, pointing to the detailed chemical analysis. "This compound targets the respiratory system with remarkable efficiency. Death would have occurred within minutes of ingestion." Reed leaned back in his chair, contemplating the implications. A specialized poison suggested a killer with access to restricted substances, someone with scientific knowledge or connections. "Tell me about Bryce Fletcher," Reed said to Detective Blackwell as she entered the office with 2 cups of coffee and a thick folder. "Bryce Fletcher, 37, moved to Phoenix 10 months ago from Boston," Blackwell began, laying out photographs and documents across Reed's desk. "He was recruited by Novatech Pharmaceuticals as lead researcher on something called Project Chrysalis. Most of the project details are classified, but what we do know is that it involved preservation compounds, chemicals designed to prevent degradation of organic materials." "And his wife?" Reed asked, studying a photograph of Elena Ramirez. Elena Ramirez, 34, specialized in pre-Columbian cultures at Arizona State University. Before moving to Phoenix, she worked at the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, focusing on artifact preservation techniques. Blackwell slid another document forward. "They met 3 years ago at a conference on preservation technologies in Chicago, married 8 months later." Reed examined their employment records, noting the prestigious positions and impressive salaries. "Not exactly typical targets for a home invasion," he remarked. By midday, Reed and Blackwell arrived at Novatech Pharmaceuticals, a gleaming glass and steel complex on the outskirts of Phoenix. The facility's security protocols were extensive: retinal scanners, key card access points, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Dr. Nathan Kingsley, Novatech's research director, greeted them with visible discomfort. "Fletcher's death is a tremendous loss to our team," he said, leading them through sterile white corridors. "His work was groundbreaking. I need to understand exactly what he was working on," Reed pressed. Kingsley hesitated. "Project Chrysalis is classified. I'll need clearance from our legal department before discussing specifics." "2 people are dead, Dr. Kingsley," Reed countered firmly. "Whatever clearance you need, get it, now." While waiting, Reed and Blackwell interviewed Fletcher's colleagues. A pattern emerged. Bryce had become increasingly secretive in recent weeks, working late hours and securing his research notes in ways that went beyond standard protocol. "He was paranoid about something," said Amber Lynch, a fellow researcher. "About 3 weeks ago, he caught someone in his office after hours, Liam Dawson, one of our senior chemists. There was a heated argument." Reed made a note. "Where can we find this Dawson?" "That's the thing," Lynch replied. "He was terminated last week, cleared out his desk and disappeared." When Kingsley finally returned with authorization to discuss Project Chrysalis, his explanation confirmed Reed's suspicions about the significance of Fletcher's work. "We were developing a compound that could preserve organic material indefinitely, without altering its molecular structure, Kingsley explained. The applications are endless. Medical samples, agricultural products, historical artifacts. He paused. Fletcher had recently achieved a breakthrough. He called it eternal formula. And the powder found on his hands? Reed asked. Kingsley's expression tightened. It sounds like a prototype version of the compound. Highly experimental, extremely valuable. By late afternoon, Reed and Blackwell arrived at Arizona State University to investigate Elena Ramirez's work. Her office in the anthropology department remained untouched since her death. Bookshelves lined with texts on ancient civilizations, walls covered with maps of archaeological sites across Arizona and Mexico. Professor James Harrington, department chair, provided insight into Ramirez's recent activities. Elena was brilliant, passionate about preserving indigenous cultural heritage, he explained. Recently, she'd become excited about a discovery, something about settlement patterns in northern Arizona that contradicted established theories. Was she working with anyone specifically? Blackwell asked. She mentioned consultations with the Navajo Nation Cultural Resources Department and Harrington paused. There was someone else, a private collector she met through her husband. Parker, I believe, Silas Parker. Reed recognized the name immediately. Silas Parker had appeared in multiple FBI bulletins, a wealthy collector with suspected ties to the black market for archaeological artifacts. The connection set off alarm bells. Back at the precinct, Reed pinned photographs of the victims alongside their suspected connections, Liam Dawson and Silas Parker, on the investigation board. The medical examiner's report confirmed the poison had been in the wine, likely administered during their final meal together. We need to find Dawson, Reed told Blackwell. His termination coinciding with Fletcher's increased paranoia isn't coincidental. A search of Dawson's apartment revealed it had been hastily abandoned, drawers left open, clothes missing, but personal items like photographs and mementos left behind. Someone had left in a hurry. He's running, Blackwell observed. As evening approached, Reed returned to the Fletcher Ramirez residence for another walkthrough. Sometimes revisiting a crime scene with new information revealed previously overlooked details. In Elena's home office, Reed noticed something he'd missed before, a small desk calendar with the notation TM, 3 p.m., marked on the day before their deaths. A check through her phone records showed a call from a prepaid cell phone at exactly that time. The garage held another clue. Mud on the floor mats of Elena's vehicle matched soil samples from the Tonto National Forest, northeast of Phoenix. GPS records confirmed she'd visited a remote location there 3 days before her death. Reed stood in the quiet house, piecing together the emerging narrative. A pharmaceutical researcher developing a revolutionary preservation compound, an anthropologist potentially discovering something historically significant, a terminated employee with access to specialized toxins, a black market antiquities dealer. This isn't just about murder, he murmured to himself. It's about whatever they found and whatever they were planning to do with it. As night fell over Phoenix, Reed's phone rang. The lab had results from the powder found on Fletcher's hands. It's unlike anything we've seen before, the technician reported. It creates a molecular barrier that prevents decomposition while maintaining structural integrity. In layman's terms, it could preserve organic material, potentially for centuries. Reed ended the call and stared at the investigation board. The pieces were aligning, but the complete picture remained elusive. What had Fletcher and Ramirez discovered that was worth killing for? Where was Liam Dawson now? And how did Silas Parker fit into this puzzle? As he gathered his notes to leave, Reed noticed a small safe deposit box key that had been catalogued among Elena's personal effects. The number engraved on it didn't match any accounts at their primary bank. Tomorrow, Reed would need to find that box, and whatever secrets it contained might finally reveal why a brilliant scientist and an accomplished anthropologist had to die. The morning sun had barely risen over Phoenix when Detective Reed arrived at First National Bank downtown. The safe deposit key recovered from Elena Ramirez's possessions had led him here, to a century-old financial institution known for its discretion and security. The box was registered 3 weeks ago, explained Margaret Wilson, the bank manager, as she escorted Reed through the vault's heavy doors. Ms. Ramirez was the only authorized signatory. When the box was finally opened, Reed found it contained just 3 items: a USB drive, a small leather-bound journal, and a photograph of an ancient stone tablet covered with unfamiliar symbols. Reed bagged the evidence carefully, already sensing these items might provide the breakthrough they needed. Back at the precinct, the technical team began analyzing the USB drive while Reed examined the journal. Written in Elena's precise handwriting, it detailed her recent research into what she called the Forgotten Settlement, a previously undocumented pre-Columbian site in northern Arizona. She believed she discovered something that would rewrite the archaeological record of the Southwest, Reed told Blackwell, reading from the journal. According to these notes, she found evidence of a settlement predating previously known civilizations in the region by at least 500 years. Valuable information for an academic, sure, Blackwell responded, but worth killing for. Reed turned to the final entries, dated just days before the murders. Listen to this. B's formula is the key. With it, we can preserve the artifacts exactly as they were found. SP has offered funding, but I don't trust his motivations. The tablet's coordinates are clear. We need to move quickly before others connect the same dots. The technical analyst interrupted with findings from the USB drive. It's encrypted, but we've recovered fragments, 3D scans of what appears to be the same tablet from the photograph, along with chemical formulas and GPS coordinates. Reed immediately recognized the significance. Bryce's preservation formula and Elena's archaeological discovery, they were combining their expertise. And SP must be Silas Parker, Blackwell added. The antiquities collector Harrington mentioned. Reed nodded, the connection solidifying. We need those coordinates analyzed and a background check on Parker. And where are we on locating Liam Dawson? Facial recognition got a hit, Blackwell replied, sliding a surveillance photo across the desk. Dawson used his credit card at a motel in Tucson yesterday. Local police are setting up surveillance now. By early afternoon, Reed was meeting with Special Agent Talia Vance from the FBI's art crime team. With her sleek black suit and no-nonsense demeanor, Vance represented federal interest in the case, particularly the connection to Silas Parker. Parker's been on our radar for years, Vance explained, reviewing the case files in Reed's office. Suspected involvement in at least a dozen cases of illegal antiquities trafficking, but he's careful, uses intermediaries, maintains plausible deniability. What's his connection to Fletcher and Ramirez? Reed asked. That's what's interesting, Vance replied, pulling up a file on her tablet. Parker attended the same preservation technology conference in Chicago, where Fletcher and Ramirez first met 3 years ago. He was there representing his foundation's Cultural Heritage Preservation Initiative. So, this relationship goes back years, Reed mused. Parker identifies 2 experts whose combined knowledge could help him locate and preserve valuable artifacts. And when they discover something significant, he eliminates them to keep it for himself, Vance finished. Classic Parker methodology. Use people for their expertise, then ensure they can't claim credit or compensation. While Reed coordinated with Vance, Detective Blackwell was pursuing another lead, analyzing the soil samples from Elena's vehicle. The forensics lab confirmed the soil contained traces of minerals consistent with the region identified in the GPS coordinates from the USB drive. She was there, Blackwell reported by phone. The area is remote, part of the Tonto National Forest, but in a section rarely visited by hikers or tourists. We need to move on this, Reed decided. Parker will already be planning to access the site. Before they could mobilize, however, another development emerged. The toxicology results had identified the exact poison used to kill Fletcher and Ramirez, a modified neurotoxin derived from a compound developed at Novatech Pharmaceuticals. Only someone with access to the lab could have produced it. Reed immediately ordered a forensic team to Dawson's abandoned apartment for a more thorough search. This time they discovered a hidden compartment in the bathroom containing vials of the same toxin found in the victim's systems and handwritten notes detailing the eternal formula, Fletcher's breakthrough preservation compound. Dawson stole both the poison and the formula, Reed realized. He's working with Parker. By late afternoon, surveillance footage from a Tucson hotel confirmed this theory. Security cameras had captured Dawson meeting with Silas Parker in the hotel restaurant 3 days after the murders. We've got them conspiring, Vance noted, watching the footage of the 2 men hunched over documents at a corner table. But we need more to make charges stick. An unexpected break came from an unlikely source. Maria Gonzalez, the Fletcher Ramirez housekeeper, contacted the police after returning from vacation in Mexico. She had been scheduled to clean the residence the day after the murders were discovered. I saw something strange the week before, she told Reed and Blackwell during her interview. A man came to the house when Dr. Fletcher was at work. He and Ms. Ramirez argued in the kitchen. She told him to leave, that the deal was off. I recognized him from a photo in Dr. Fletcher's office. They worked together. When shown a photo lineup, Gonzalez immediately identified Liam Dawson. And there was something else, she added. The day before I left for vacation, I arrived early and saw the same man outside the house watching. He drove away quickly when he saw me. This testimony established Dawson's surveillance of the victims prior to their murders, another piece of the conspiracy puzzle falling into place. As evening approached, the technical team finished analyzing the GPS coordinates from Elena's USB drive. They pinpointed a location in a remote canyon within the Tonto National Forest, approximately 50 miles northeast of Phoenix. "We need to get there before they do," Reed told Vance. "If there's an undiscovered archaeological site with potentially valuable artifacts, Parker won't waste time." "I'll coordinate with the Bureau of Land Management and tribal authorities," Vance replied. "This site may be on protected land," Reed nodded, turning to Blackwell. "And we need to locate Parker, his home, his office, anywhere he might be preparing for this excavation." As they mobilized resources, Reed received one more crucial piece of information. The photograph from the Fletcher Ramirez bedroom, showing the couple at an archaeological dig with a third person partially visible, had been enhanced by the forensic imaging team. The third person was Liam Dawson. They all knew each other before Phoenix, Reed realized, studying the enhanced image. This wasn't a random connection through Novatech. Fletcher brought Dawson into the company. The case was evolving beyond a simple murder investigation. What had begun as an apparent home invasion was revealing itself as a complex conspiracy involving revolutionary science, potentially groundbreaking archaeological discoveries, and a black market antiquities dealer willing to kill for access to both. As night fell over Phoenix, Reed assembled his team for a briefing, laying out what they knew and what they still needed to discover. The connections between the victims and suspects were becoming clearer, but the full extent of the conspiracy and what exactly lay hidden in that remote canyon remained to be uncovered. "Tomorrow we move on all fronts," Reed announced. "We find Dawson, we locate Parker, and we secure that archaeological site. Whatever Fletcher and Ramirez discovered, it cost them their lives, and we're going to make sure it brings their killers to justice." What Reed couldn't know was that even as he spoke, Silas Parker was already mobilizing his own team to reach the site first, and that the ancient tablet's secrets were far more valuable than anyone had yet realized. The helicopter's blades cut through the early morning air as Detective Reed surveyed the rugged terrain below. The remote canyon in the Tonto National Forest revealed itself in the dawn light, a maze of rust-colored cliffs and deep shadows. Beside him, Special Agent Vance consulted a topographical map marked with the coordinates from Elena Ramirez's USB drive. "There," Vance pointed to a narrow plateau halfway up the eastern canyon wall. "That matches the elevation and positioning from her notes." The pilot acknowledged and adjusted their course. As they approached, Reed spotted something that confirmed they weren't the first to arrive. A makeshift camp had been established near the base of the cliff, with climbing equipment staged for an ascent. "Parker's people are already here," Reed observed grimly. The helicopter set down a half-mile away to avoid detection. Reed, Vance, and 4 FBI field agents disembarked, equipped with hiking gear and weapons. Their approach would need to be quiet and careful. "According to satellite imagery, there's no easy vehicle access," Vance explained as they began their hike. "They must have come in on foot overnight." As the team moved through the canyon, Reed's mind returned to a crucial discovery made the previous evening. The technical team had finally broken through the remaining encryption on Elena's USB drive, revealing detailed notes about what she called the Tucson manuscript. The manuscript, the tablet photographed in the safe deposit box, had apparently been discovered by a construction crew in Tucson 6 months earlier, then quietly acquired by Silas Parker before academic institutions could learn of its existence. Galena, through her university connections, had heard rumors of the find and approached Parker about studying it. What she discovered in those ancient symbols was astonishing. Directions to a hidden settlement and references to a sacred chamber containing artifacts of immense cultural and historical significance. According to her notes, the site predated known civilizations in the region and contained evidence of advanced astronomical knowledge. The team reached a vantage point overlooking the makeshift camp. Through binoculars, Reed counted 4 individuals, 3 armed men in hiking gear, and a 4th figure he immediately recognized as Liam Dawson. "No sign of Parker," Reed whispered to Vance. "He rarely gets his hands dirty," she replied. "These will be hired help. experienced excavators who don't ask questions. They watched as Dawson consulted papers, likely copies of the same coordinates and notes they were following, and directed the others to prepare climbing equipment. The team was clearly preparing to ascend to the plateau Elena had identified. Reed's radio crackled with an update from Phoenix. "Detective, we've located Parker," came Detective Blackwell's voice. "His private jet filed a flight plan to Flagstaff last night. Local authorities confirm he rented a helicopter this morning. He's coming in from the north," Reed realized, "probably planning to extract whatever they find by air." The stakes were escalating. Not only were they racing against Dawson's ground team, but Parker himself was en route, suggesting the find was significant enough to warrant his personal attention. Reed divided their forces. He and 2 agents would continue tracking Dawson's team, while Vance and the others would establish a position to intercept Parker's helicopter when it arrived. As they moved into position, Reed reflected on how the case had transformed. What began as a double homicide investigation had evolved into a race to protect what might be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in southwestern history. Dawson's team began their ascent up the cliff face, using pre-placed pitons and ropes that suggested previous visits. Reed and his agents followed at a distance, using a natural chimney in the rock that provided cover for their climb. Near the top, Reed paused to catch his breath and check their position. From this height, the canyon sprawled beneath them like an ancient river of stone. He could understand why prehistoric peoples might have considered this place sacred. The plateau itself was larger than it had appeared from below, perhaps 50 yards across, with a flat area that showed signs of human modification. Crude steps had been carved into the rock, and what appeared to be the remains of stone structures were visible beneath centuries of accumulated soil and vegetation. Dawson's team reached the plateau first and immediately began unpacking equipment, shovels, brushes, and scanning devices. Reed observed through binoculars as Dawson consulted Elena's notes, directing the others to a specific location marked by an unusual rock formation. "They're starting to dig," Reed whispered into his radio. "What's your status on Parker?" "Radar has picked up an incoming helicopter," Vance responded. "ETA 15 minutes. We're in position to intercept." Reed knew they needed to time their intervention perfectly. Moving too soon would risk a confrontation before they could gather evidence of illegal excavation. Waiting too long might allow the team to remove whatever artifacts they discovered. Through his binoculars, Reed watched as Dawson's team uncovered something, a stone slab embedded in the ground. They worked feverishly to clear soil from around it, revealing ancient symbols carved into its surface that matched those from the Tucson manuscript. Suddenly, one of the workers called out and pointed skyward. The distant sound of helicopter blades echoed through the canyon. Parker was arriving ahead of schedule. "We need to move now," Reed radioed to Vance. "Parker's approaching the plateau directly." Reed and his agents emerged from their hiding place, weapons drawn. "Federal agents, stop where you are!" Reed shouted. Chaos erupted on the plateau. 2 of Dawson's men reached for weapons, while Dawson himself grabbed a backpack and ran toward the edge of the cliff. The helicopter, a sleek black craft with no identifying markings, appeared above the plateau, hovering 30 feet up. As federal agents engaged with the armed excavators, Reed pursued Dawson, who was attempting to secure a climbing rope to make his escape down the cliff face. The backpack, likely containing whatever they had managed to extract from the site, was clutched tightly in his hand. "It's over, Dawson," Reed called out, his weapon trained on the fugitive. "We know everything. The poison, the partnership with Parker, the murders. There's nowhere left to run." For a moment, Dawson hesitated, looking from Reed to the hovering helicopter. Through the craft's windows, Reed could see Silas Parker's face, watching the scene unfold with cold calculation. In that instant, Reed witnessed the brutal reality of Parker's operation. As Dawson raised his hand to signal the helicopter, Parker made a slight gesture to his pilot. The craft banked sharply away, abandoning Dawson on the plateau. "He's leaving you behind," Reed told Dawson, advancing cautiously. "Parker cuts his losses. Always has." The betrayal visibly shattered Dawson's resolve. His shoulders slumped as he watched the helicopter disappear around the canyon wall. Without resistance, he dropped the backpack and raised his hands in surrender. As the plateau was secured, Reed examined the backpack's contents. A small stone box intricately carved with the same symbols as the manuscript. Inside lay several preserved parchment fragments and a ceremonial object made of an unidentifiable metal alloy. "These are just samples," Dawson muttered, his voice hollow with defeat. The main chamber is still sealed. We were waiting for Parker's specialized equipment to open it without damaging the contents. Within the hour, the site was swarming with FBI personnel, archaeological experts from Arizona State University, and representatives from the Navajo Nation Cultural Office. The discovery was everything Elena Ramirez had believed it to be, evidence of an unknown civilization with sophisticated astronomical knowledge and unique metallurgical capabilities. As Dawson was taken into custody, Reed turned his attention to the fleeing Silas Parker. The helicopter had been tracked to a private airstrip near Flagstaff, but Parker himself had already departed on his private jet before authorities could arrive. "He's running," Vance noted, joining Reed at the edge of the plateau. "International arrest warrant is already being processed." Reed nodded, gazing out over the canyon. "What about the site?" "It's being properly documented and secured," Vance replied. "The tribal authorities and university will oversee the excavation. Whatever's down there will be preserved and studied according to proper archaeological protocols, exactly what Elena Ramirez would have wanted." As the sun began to set over the canyon, Reed returned to the stone slab that Dawson's team had uncovered. The ancient symbols, now carefully cleaned by university archaeologists, seemed to pulse with centuries of hidden knowledge. "They died for this," Reed said quietly, thinking of Fletcher and Ramirez. "Not just for the artifacts, but for what they represent. A piece of human history that might have been lost or exploited." Back in Phoenix that evening, Reed added new elements to the investigation board. Photographs of the plateau, the stone box, and the ancient symbols that had set this tragedy in motion. The case was expanding beyond murder into international antiquities trafficking, with connections to black market dealers across 3 continents. Financial investigators had uncovered transfers from Parker's accounts to offshore holdings controlled by Dawson, payments totaling over $2 million in the weeks before and after the murders. The conspiracy was now documented in banking records, encrypted communications, and Dawson's own testimony as he sought to negotiate leniency. But the most significant break came from an unexpected source. The Fletcher Ramirez housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez, contacted Reed with a crucial revelation. While cleaning their home office weeks before the murders, she had discovered and inadvertently moved a hidden camera disguised as a desk ornament. "I thought it was just decoration," she explained. "I put it back, but maybe not exactly the same way." That camera, installed by Dawson during a previous visit to the home, had recorded conversations between Fletcher and Ramirez about their discovery and their growing suspicions about Parker's intentions. Most critically, it had captured Dawson himself, retrieving the device just days after the murders. The evidence was mounting, the connections solidifying. Yet even as one conspiracy unraveled, Reed sensed that the full story of the Tucson manuscript and its ancient secrets was just beginning to emerge. 3 weeks after the discovery at the canyon, Detective Mason Reed stood in the observation room of the Phoenix Police Department, watching as Liam Dawson sat across from his attorney in interview room B. The former Novatech researcher had aged visibly since his arrest, his once meticulous appearance now disheveled, dark circles shadowing his eyes. The weight of 2 murder charges and the prospect of a lifetime in prison had broken his resolve. "He's ready to talk," said District Attorney Eleanor Martinez, joining Reed at the window. "Full confession in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table." Reed nodded, his expression grim. "Let's hear what he has to say." The recorded interview would prove to be the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, as Dawson methodically detailed a conspiracy more elaborate than even Reed had suspected. It had begun 3 years earlier at the Chicago conference where Fletcher, Ramirez, and Parker first met. Parker, always searching for academic partners who could legitimize his antiquities acquisitions, had recognized the potential in combining Fletcher's chemical expertise with Ramirez's archaeological knowledge. He cultivated their friendship, funded research grants through his foundation, and positioned himself as a patron of scientific and historical preservation. Parker was obsessed with being the one to make a truly historic discovery, Dawson explained in his confession. "Not just finding artifacts, but changing our understanding of human history." When construction workers in Tucson uncovered that stone tablet, he moved quickly to acquire it before authorities were notified. Dawson had entered the picture shortly thereafter. An old college friend of Fletcher's, he had been recruited to Novatech specifically to assist with the preservation formula and to serve as Parker's inside man, monitoring Fletcher's progress. The breakthrough came faster than anyone expected. Dawson continued. Fletcher's eternal formula worked. It could preserve organic materials indefinitely without degradation. The archaeological implications were revolutionary. Meanwhile, Elena Ramirez had been secretly studying the Tucson manuscript, deciphering symbols that pointed to an undocumented settlement in the Tonto National Forest. When she combined her translation with satellite imagery, she identified the plateau as the likely location of what she called the Sky Watchers, an ancient culture with advanced astronomical knowledge. The plan was simple at first, Dawson admitted. Fletcher and Ramirez would locate and preserve the artifacts using his formula. Parker would fund the expedition, document the discovery and share credit with them. The academic recognition would be theirs. The financial benefits would be his. But everything changed when Fletcher discovered the true nature of Parker's operation. Through a colleague at the Museum of Natural History, he learned that Parker had been selling illegally obtained artifacts to private collectors worldwide for decades. Their discovery wouldn't be shared with the world. It would disappear into private collections, with Fletcher and Ramirez eventually silenced once their expertise was no longer needed. When Fletcher confronted me, I denied everything, Dawson said, his voice hollow. But he didn't believe me. He began securing his research, compartmentalizing the formula so no single person had all components. He and Elena started making plans to approach the university and tribal authorities directly. Parker had been unwilling to let his prize slip away. He ordered Dawson to act immediately, using a modified version of a neurotoxin compound developed in Novatech's laboratories. It was supposed to look like food poisoning, Dawson explained. I delivered their takeout that night, already laced with the toxin. Once they were incapacitated, I retrieved the formula documents from the safe and searched for Elena's research. What Dawson hadn't anticipated was that the couple had already secured their most important findings in the bank's safe deposit box, the key to which was hidden where he couldn't find it. As Dawson's confession continued, Reed received an urgent message from Special Agent Vance. Interpol had located Silas Parker aboard his yacht near the Greek islands. Extradition proceedings were already underway. The case was advancing on multiple fronts. Forensic accountants had traced financial connections between Parker and similar archaeological theft operations in Peru, Egypt, and Cambodia. What had begun as a local double homicide investigation had expanded into one of the largest antiquities trafficking cases in FBI history. Meanwhile, the archaeological site on the plateau had yielded discoveries that validated Elena Ramirez's theories. Under proper scientific excavation, researchers had uncovered a sealed chamber containing remarkably preserved artifacts, including astronomical instruments of unexpected sophistication, textiles preserved by the dry climate, and most significantly, organic material that could now be accurately dated using Fletcher's preservation techniques, ironically completed by his colleagues at Novatech. The Skywatchers appear to have occupied the site between 300 BCE and 100 CE, explained Dr. Catherine Yazzie, the lead archaeologist from Arizona State University, during a briefing Reed attended. Their astronomical calculations show an understanding of celestial movements that rivals ancient Mayan knowledge. This discovery will indeed rewrite our understanding of pre-Columbian cultures in North America. Dr. Yazzie's team had worked closely with tribal representatives to ensure proper cultural protocols were observed. The site and its contents would be jointly managed by the university and tribal authorities, with plans for an educational center that would honor both the ancient culture and the modern researchers whose work had brought it to light. Dr. Ramirez would have approved, Dr. Yazzie added quietly, acknowledging the tragic circumstances that had led to the discovery. Back at the precinct, Reed updated the investigation board with the final connections. Photographs showed the network linking Dawson to Parker through offshore accounts and encrypted communications. Evidence recovered from Dawson's laptop revealed detailed surveillance of Fletcher and Ramirez in the weeks before their murders, including photographs of their home, work schedules, and security system specifications. The most damning evidence came from hotel security footage in Tucson, where cameras had captured Parker and Dawson meeting 3 times in the month before the murders. Lip-reading experts had analyzed the footage, confirming that they discussed eliminating complications and securing the formula. But the case's most unexpected turn came from Maria Gonzalez, the Fletcher Ramirez housekeeper. Her earlier statement about moving the hidden camera had led investigators to search for additional surveillance devices. A thorough sweep of the residence revealed a second camera in the living room, one that had captured the murders themselves. "I didn't know it was still recording," Dawson confessed when confronted with this information. Parker insisted on multiple devices in case one failed. The footage, which would never be shown in court but was described in legal documents, showed Dawson arriving with the food delivery, Fletcher and Ramirez greeting him as a friend, and the three sharing the meal that would prove fatal. It captured the moment when the couple began showing symptoms, their realization of what was happening, and their futile attempts to reach phones for help. Most critically, it showed Dawson methodically searching the house while they lay dying, his latex-gloved hands rifling through drawers, checking books, and eventually opening the wall safe after locating the combination in Fletcher's desk. "It's the most calculated, cold-blooded murder I've seen in 20 years of prosecution," District Attorney Martinez told Reed after reviewing the evidence. "Betraying friends who welcomed him into their home, watching them die, then calmly stealing their life's work. The jury won't have any reasonable doubt." As the case against Dawson solidified, international efforts to apprehend Parker intensified. Greek authorities, acting on the Interpol warrant, had seized his yacht, but Parker himself had slipped away hours before, likely tipped off by contacts within law enforcement. "He's resourceful and has connections everywhere," Special Agent Vance explained during a conference call, "but his accounts are frozen, his network is compromised, and we've identified his aliases. It's just a matter of time." That time would come sooner than expected. Parker's desperation led him to contact an associate in Mexico City, a connection that had been under FBI surveillance since the investigation began. Within hours of that communication, Mexican federal police located and arrested Parker as he attempted to cross into Guatemala with false identification. The final piece of the conspiracy fell into place with Parker's extradition to Arizona. Unlike Dawson, the antiquities dealer maintained his innocence, hiring a team of high-profile defense attorneys to fight the charges. But the evidence was overwhelming. Banking records, communications, witness testimonies, and Dawson's detailed confession created an unbreakable chain linking Parker to the murders. Most damning was recovered audio from Parker's own phone, a recorded conversation in which he explicitly ordered Dawson to resolve the Fletcher-Ramirez problem permanently and discussed how to make it look natural. As Reed prepared for the trial, he returned one last time to the Fletcher-Ramirez residence, now empty and still. Standing in the living room where the couple had spent their final moments, he reflected on the human cost of this conspiracy, 2 brilliant lives cut short by greed, and the arrogance of those who believed historical treasures should be private possessions rather than shared knowledge. On the wall hung a photograph Reed had noticed during his first visit, Fletcher and Ramirez, at an archaeological site, smiling in the desert sun, unaware of how their passion for preservation and discovery would ultimately lead to their deaths. "We got them," Reed said quietly to the empty room. "Your work will continue, and your killers will face justice." The stage was set for what would become one of the most closely watched trials in Arizona history, a case that would ultimately expose not just 2 murders, but an international network of archaeological theft that had operated in the shadows for decades. The Maricopa County Superior Courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue Arizona sky as crowds gathered for the first day of what the media had dubbed the Antiquities Murder Trial. News vans lined the street, reporters jostled for positions near the entrance, and sketch artists prepared to capture the proceedings that were closed to cameras. Inside courtroom 4B, Detective Mason Reed sat behind the prosecution table, reviewing his notes one final time. After 9 months of investigation, evidence gathering, and pre-trial motions, the case against Liam Dawson and Silas Parker was finally coming to trial. "Nervous?" asked Special Agent Vance, sliding into the seat beside him. Reed shook his head. "The evidence speaks for itself. I'm just ready for this to be over." The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Miranda Holbrook entered. A veteran jurist with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom, she surveyed the packed gallery with a stern expression. "Given the significant public interest in this case," she began, "I want to make it clear that I will not tolerate any disruptions or attempts to influence these proceedings through media speculation. This court will deal strictly with facts and evidence as presented." The trial opened with District Attorney Elena Martinez's powerful opening statement. She stood before the jury, 8 women and 4 men selected after an exhaustive vetting process, and spoke without notes, her voice steady and commanding. "This case is about betrayal in its most fundamental form," she began. "Betrayal of friendship, betrayal of professional trust, and betrayal of human decency. The evidence will show that the defendants, Liam Dawson and Silas Parker, meticulously planned and executed the murders of Bryce Fletcher and Eleanor Ramirez, not in the heat of passion, not in a moment of desperation, but through cold, calculated decisions driven by greed and ambition." Martinez methodically outlined the prosecution's case, the scientific breakthrough, the archaeological discovery, the conspiracy to steal both, and finally, the poisoning that silenced the victims forever. "By the conclusion of this trial," she told the jury, "you will have no reasonable doubt that these defendants are responsible for these murders and the theft of intellectual and cultural property that belonged not just to the victims, but to our shared human history." The defense strategies diverged immediately. Dawson's attorney, public defender Michael Chen, acknowledged his client's involvement, but emphasized his role as a tool wielded by the true mastermind, attempting to shift primary blame to Parker. Meanwhile, Parker's high-priced legal team, led by renowned defense attorney Victoria Blackwell, presented their client as a legitimate businessman and patron of the arts, who had been manipulated and framed by a desperate man seeking to avoid responsibility for his own actions. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution built its case methodically. Forensic experts testified about the sophisticated neurotoxin used in the murders, tracing its components directly to Novatech's laboratories where Dawson had worked. Financial investigators detailed the money trail connecting Parker's offshore accounts to Dawson. Computer forensic specialists recovered deleted communications, outlining the conspiracy in explicit detail. Dr. Nathan Kingsley from Novatech explained the revolutionary nature of Fletcher's preservation formula and its potential value in both scientific and commercial applications. "We estimated its market value in the billions over time," he testified. "It represented a fundamental breakthrough in preservation technology." Dr. Catherine Yazzie presented findings from the archaeological site, describing its significance with quiet reverence. What Dr. Ramirez discovered was not just artifacts, but evidence of a mathematical and astronomical understanding that challenges our entire timeline of intellectual development in pre-Columbian North America. The most powerful testimony came from Maria Gonzalez, the housekeeper who had unwittingly discovered the hidden cameras. Her simple, heartfelt descriptions of Fletcher and Ramirez, their kindness, their passion for their work, the future they had planned together, humanized the victims in ways that technical evidence could not. "They were good people," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "They wanted their work to help everyone, not just make money. They talked about building a museum where children could learn about the ancient people who lived here." When the prosecution presented the surveillance footage showing Dawson delivering the poisoned meal, several jurors visibly recoiled. The clinical precision with which he had executed the murders, carefully wearing gloves, methodically searching for research materials while his friends lay dying, painted a picture of callousness that no defense could easily mitigate. Dawson himself took the stand as part of his plea agreement, providing first-hand testimony about Parker's role in orchestrating the crimes. Though clearly attempting to minimize his own culpability, his account of Parker's instructions was damning. "Mr. Parker told me explicitly that Fletcher and Ramirez had become obstacles that needed to be permanently removed," Dawson testified. He said that with their formula and her archaeological discovery, he could build an empire in the antiquities market, preservation techniques that would make him the exclusive source for pristine ancient artifacts. Parker's defense team fought aggressively to discredit Dawson, portraying him as a desperate man, fabricating evidence to save himself from a death sentence. But their strategy crumbled when the prosecution presented the recovered audio from Parker's own phone, his voice clearly recognizable as he discussed the Fletcher-Ramirez problem and the need for a clean solution that can't be traced. Parker himself refused to testify, invoking his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. His silence spoke volumes to the jury, who had watched him sit impassively throughout the proceedings, showing no emotion even when photographs of the victims were displayed. After 26 days of testimony, over 40 witnesses, and more than 200 pieces of evidence, closing arguments began. Martinez addressed the jury with the same composed intensity she had maintained throughout the trial. "The evidence before you tells a story of brilliant minds silenced by greed," she said. "Bryce Fletcher and Elena Ramirez sought to preserve history for everyone. The defendants sought to steal that history for themselves, and when the victims stood in their way, They were eliminated with clinical precision. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity. It was premeditated murder in service of theft on a grand scale. The jury deliberated for just 11 hours before returning their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Holbrook instructed the defendants to rise. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Bryce Fletcher, how do you find the defendant Liam Dawson? Guilty, Your Honor. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Elena Ramirez, how do you find the defendant Liam Dawson? Guilty, Your Honor. The same verdicts followed for Silas Parker, along with additional convictions for both men on charges of conspiracy, theft of intellectual property, and trafficking in illegally obtained cultural artifacts. 2 weeks later, the court reconvened for sentencing. Judge Holbrook addressed the defendants directly, her tone measured but unyielding. Mr. Dawson, despite your cooperation with authorities, the calculated nature of these crimes and the betrayal of trust they represent cannot be overlooked. In accordance with your plea agreement removing the death penalty, I sentence you to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Turning to Parker, whose expression remained impassive, she continued, Mr. Parker, you have shown no remorse, accepted no responsibility, and exploited your position of wealth and influence to orchestrate these murders. I sentence you to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years for the conspiracy and trafficking charges. As the defendants were led away, Reed watched from his seat behind the prosecution table. The case had consumed nearly a year of his life, challenging him professionally and emotionally in ways few investigations had before. Outside the courthouse, he spoke briefly with reporters who had gathered for statements. Justice was served today, he said simply. But we shouldn't forget what was lost. 2 brilliant minds whose work would have benefited humanity, and an approach to archaeological discovery that respected both science and cultural heritage. In the months that followed, the broader implications of the case continued to unfold. Parker's antiquities trafficking network was systematically dismantled by international authorities, leading to the recovery of thousands of illegally obtained artifacts that were returned to their countries of origin. His financial empire collapsed as associates rushed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency. At Arizona State University, the Elena Ramirez Center for Cultural Preservation was established, dedicated to ethical archaeological practices and collaboration with indigenous communities. Novatech Pharmaceuticals, with the blessing of Fletcher's family, released his preservation formula to the scientific community as open-source technology, ensuring that his breakthrough would benefit research worldwide rather than being controlled by corporate interests. The archaeological site in Tonto National Forest was carefully excavated under the joint supervision of university researchers and tribal representatives. The discoveries there, subsequently dated to over 2,300 years ago, fundamentally altered understanding of pre-Columbian North American cultures, just as Elena had predicted. 1 year after the verdicts, Detective Mason Reed stood at the newly opened exhibition at the Arizona State Museum. The Skywatchers, Rediscovering America's Ancient Astronomers, showcased the findings from the plateau, presented with explanatory texts in both English and indigenous languages. A small plaque near the entrance acknowledged the tragic circumstances that had led to the discovery, with photographs of Fletcher and Ramirez alongside a simple inscription. Their work continues. Reed studied the ancient artifacts, celestial mapping instruments, precisely carved stone calendars, and preserved textiles showing astronomical patterns, all preserved using techniques derived from Fletcher's formula. They would have been proud, said Dr. Catherine Yazzie, joining him at the exhibition. Their work is changing how we understand our past, and their story is changing how we approach archaeological ethics in the present. Reed nodded, thinking of the complex investigation that had begun with 2 bodies in a Paradise Valley home and expanded to encompass international criminal networks, revolutionary science, and ancient history. In the end, he reflected, their killers thought they were just removing obstacles, but what Fletcher and Ramirez discovered was too important to remain hidden. The truth found its way into the light. As he left the museum, stepping into the harsh Arizona sunlight, Reed felt the satisfaction of a case truly closed, not just with convictions, but with a legacy that would endure far beyond the courtroom. The Fletcher-Ramirez case had changed how archaeological discoveries would be handled for generations to come, ensuring that ancient knowledge would be preserved for everyone, just as the victims had intended. Justice had been served, not only for two murdered researchers, but for history itself.